Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in again to another Thatcher Report podcast. I wrote an essay a couple weeks ago about a really interesting event I went to at a friend's apartment with a speaker, a Palestinian speaker named Ahmed Fouad Al-Khatib, and it was great. I wrote about it. I am skipping that essay because I got a little snowed in. And now I have a new essay, but I hope to get back to it because earlier this week, I hosted a different thinker at an event for me. And of course, I invited the person who invited me to hear Ahmed. And I hosted Adam Lewis Klein, who's a young Jewish academic. And it was really interesting to listen to him. And I think it would be very cool to have a back-to-back with Lewis Klein and Al-Khatib. They have a lot of similarities and a lot of overlaps, but a different focus. The Palestinian guy is focused on Gaza, where he's from. The Jewish guy is focused a lot on what's happening to him as an academic and to Jews in America. But they have a lot of overlap and a lot of similar insights, which is refreshing and validating, certainly. So this post is kind of a reintroduction to the Thatcher Report. I guess over time, we hopefully reflect on our lives, think about our approach, and I just kind of wanted to kind of revisit where I'm coming from and trying to which involves a Jewish history, to kind of just express the viewpoint that's kind of obvious among Jewish people who have spent time in Israel and know something about Hebrew. Either they're totally fluent in Hebrew or they can pray in Hebrew or whatever it is, but they're kind of in this conversation. It's a really, really old and ancient conversation. And we kind of talk to ourselves about it, but I don't think that many other people really get it. And it was certainly helpful for me to revisit where I'm coming from, and I think you might find it relatable. Even if you're not Jewish, it doesn't really matter. It's just nice to kind of clarify the perspectives. So here's my little introduction. So I'm Zachary. As you can tell, I live in New York. I have a son. He is the focus of my life. And when I'm not changing his diapers and running after him and cuddling and reading him the same book over and over and over again, I also run a boutique marketing agency. It's called Thacher Interactive. You're noticing a trend here with my naming conventions. We make digital strategies and websites for corporations and nonprofits. I've been doing it for over 15 years, and I'm very fortunate to run my own small but mighty company. And I'm particularly fortunate for my wonderful clients. Now, over here, you're listening to the Thatcher Report. I writing about, mostly politics and culture. I think there is a field of political economics, which I find really fascinating. And had I stayed in academia, I might have wound up in that. But I'm a little bit more culture, a little bit less math. So I'm sort of interested in political culture, political ethics. Here's my perspective. You're not going to find it that surprising if you've been listening, but I think I just kind of want to condense it and kind of make it coherent in a way, hopefully. So here's the perspective that I come from when I'm dealing with the fact that there's like protests against Jewish conferences now in New York City, which just happened the other week. Bret Stephens, a Jewish columnist at the New York Times, spoke at an event for a mostly Jewish audience about Jewish things, and left-wing progressive protesters showed up there. That's pretty shocking. That's not normal. That shouldn't comport with any views of the left or progressives. If a bunch of gay people showed up or Black people showed up for a conference to talk about issues important to them, they wouldn't go and protest them. But Jews now are being protested. It's that slippery slope. It's scary. We also, of course, have a mayor who condones and encourages this kind of discriminatory behavior with his actions. So it's not good. Anyways, so here's the perspective. Jews are the indigenous people of Israel. That's why, okay. We hear a lot about indigeneity, land acknowledgements. Well, Israel is where we come from. You can do genetic testing for this, and I could go on and on and on to prove it, but that's the story. And we're not a religion. And now many Jews say we are a religion. It's super confusing. But at the end of the day, trust me on this, we're not a religion like Christians or Muslims are a religion, where you can just do sort of declare a sentence of belief, a sincere sentence of belief, and with one of their authority figures, like a priest or an imam or something, and then baptism, and then you're a member of that religion. You can come from any background. You just boom. It's like it happens very fast. I'm not saying it's not real, but that's the process. Jews aren't really like that, although we do have conversion. It's a little complicated, but we're kind of more like Native Americans. We blend geography of Israel and all the places that we've lived since leaving Israel. Belief systems, obviously, belief in one God and all the rules that God gave us. Language, ethnicity, culture, and history. We take all that and we turn it and we blend it all together into a collective identity. So I'm not an expert in Native American culture or anything, but that seems what it's more like. It's more analogous to that than a Christian. And this is our story. Excuse me. A long time ago, we were a family of nonconformists from northern Iraq who settled in Canaan. Not too long after, a couple of generations, we moved to Egypt due to climate change. It's a true story. We had lots, and then down in Egypt, we had a good little piece of land, a nice area to live in. We had lots and lots of babies. We formed 12 tribes, so lots of people. And then, unfortunately, the ancient Egyptians enslaved us. I think it's 400 years later, we emerged from Egypt as hundreds of thousands of people. Where did we want to go? Back to Canaan, where we started. And on the way to Canaan, our leader, Moses, wrote the Torah, which is the 5 books of Moses, the core of the Hebrew Bible. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, I'm thinking of the names in Hebrew and in English at the same time, and Numbers and Deuteronomy. That's how you say it in English. Now, did Moses invent all of this, or did God dictate it? That's a person, you'll decide what works for you. But no matter what the origins are, this Torah, which means teaching, this big scroll, it's kind of like the U.S. Constitution, but with stories mixed in with rules. You've heard of some of the rules, like the 10 Commandments. There's other ones. So now we're heading to Canaan as a people, and we have a purpose because we have this constitution. We violently and brutally took over Canaan, and all of many of the books of prophets detail this. It's brutal. We took it over, and we forged the empire of Israel. And this is, maybe like 1500 BC-ish. It was a really small empire. It had great food, and it had very cool innovations. You've heard of some of them, like the alphabet, the weekend, not the band, the actual idea of taking a break at the end of every work week, and monotheism. So these are all really interesting ideas. We could spend a lot of time talking about them, but I just want to focus briefly on why monotheism is particularly cool, because it has this really interesting political function. If you know there's one God, that means that all people are equal. So if there's one supreme God, well, then no one can be like this one supreme God. All people are equally not God. You can't be, in our belief system, you can't be a half God or part God. You're just a person. Now, as a twist, since we believe humans are also created in God's image, that means all people are almost sacred. I say almost sacred because God is the divinity here, but we're made in God's image, so the thinking goes, and it means it's really special. Our lives are anybody's life, anybody alive. It's just so incredibly special. It doesn't matter where you were born, how much money you have, what you look like, even what your ideas are. You're just important. Now, this innovative God idea, it functions like a lever, and it lifts you up past the world of subjective and arbitrary gods and their rulers who claim special rights that, funnily enough, always only serve their own interests. No one in this God idea that we have, no one can say, I'm better than you, and then subjugate you forever. God means all humans have to be treated as equal. And to ensure those rights, we have to have a rule of law. That's the Constitution part. So we have these really nice fuzzy ideas, but you actually have to enforce them, and you have laws for that, like the Ten Commandments. So it's political because you can't have a divine right of kings. You can't have aristocracies with nobilities who think that they have blue blood, like they're actually better than other people. No, that doesn't work. Poor people deserve as many rights as rich people. There's always going to be poor people. There's always going to be rich people. This God idea doesn't fix that. But the idea is that there's kind of a floor for equal treatment for everybody. And that's what eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth means. A lot of people misinterpret this, or maybe I'm not a Christian theologian. I don't know how they interpret it, but in the Jewish perspective, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth means that the rich people can't buy their way out of trouble. You can't say, oh, I poked out your eye and here's $100 or $1 million. Nope. All eyes and teeth are equal. So don't poke or pull them, please. It's a radical sense of equality among people. And the big idea is that you're born free. Freedom is the default setting. Yes, in ancient Israel, there was slavery. We can talk about it. It was a kind of like a debtor's prison. It was not meant to be permanent. It was temporary. And these are really good ideas. They're really good laws. Not everybody follows them. That's always a problem. But this is the kind of political technology that we came up with. Sounds a little bit familiar to you as the listener now in 2026, because literally around 2,000 years later, after they killed a lot of Jews for absolutely no reason, Europe caught on to these great ideas. Now, they kind of forgot about the God part, or they purposely got rid of the God part, but they embraced the resulting ideas of equality, liberalism, and so on. So can these kind of political values last without God? I'm not sure that they can anymore. I think we're in the beginning of a new era, a post-liberal era. But whatever, it doesn't matter what I think. I can't predict the future. Just thinking about where we are now, the American and then the French revolutions that embrace these ideas were a really good start. So let's go back to ancient Israel. So they came from Egypt. They got these rules. They made God central to the belief system, and they had a little empire. It's very small, but it had these really epic agricultural parties at the very big temple several times a year. And they suffered terrible setbacks from nearby Assyrians, Babylonians, and Greeks. And they attacked Israel. That was very small. It didn't have any plans to expand, and they attacked for no reason. You're going to see a pattern here. But even with the occasional loss of political control, the ancient Israelis, the ancient Jews soldiered on in our small little corner of mostly inland territory. Milk, honey, you name it, it was pretty good. Then the Roman Empire ended our roughly 1,500 years of sovereignty in 70 AD. I don't like using the terms BCE and CE. They seem kind of, I know everybody uses them, but they just seem to be not telling the truth. They say the common era. Well, common because it's for Jesus. I don't know if somebody in Japan thinks about it as the common era like that. I don't know. That's up to them. But in the West, we base our calendar, their Gregorian calendar is the current iteration of it, on the birth of Jesus. So I'm very comfortable acknowledging that reality. I don't know why people have to feel like they can't just say it. And they say common era and before common era. It's like common because of Jesus. And people who believe that, there are more of them, and they're powerful. Anyways, so the Romans took away our sovereignty at 70 AD. They destroyed, there was a lot of warfare for for like 100 years or something, but they eventually won. So all the Jews left, or not all, they didn't all leave, but basically the Jews were dispersed. They certainly lost control, political control. So now, a couple millennia later, during the very last kind of fading twilight of the Ottoman Empire, which was based in Istanbul, some European Jews decided to reclaim Israel. It took about 100 years, from 1840 to the 1940s. It took about 100 years of awful, insane, backbreaking agricultural work, but they were doing it. And while they were doing this, now we're getting, up until the 1900s, and then 1920s, Europeans decided to murder all the Jews. Now, I'm simplifying and being a little reductive to get through the history quickly. Not every single European, but a lot of the Europeans decided this. It wasn't just like 4 guys. So in about 12 years, a little more than 10 years, in a coordinated, cross-continental, and often voluntary effort, the Europeans killed 6 million Jews in specially built death factories. Now, 6 million, it's a big number. There had been 9.5 million European Jews, is the estimate, before all this started. All right? So that's a huge percentage of the population of Jews. To this day, right now, the global Jewish population is around 15 million people. That's it. That's all we have in the whole world. There's 1.5 billion Catholics. There's 1.5 billion Muslims, 15 million Jews. We could fit comfortably within, New York and parts of New Jersey, and then that's it. That's all that we have. And our population, therefore, is still recovering from the Holocaust. We should normally, maybe have twice as many people by now if you think of birth rates, but we don't. So Europeans killed many other people that they didn't like, of course, millions of other people. It's horrible. But they paid a very special attention to killing Jews. That was one of the pivotal ideas of the Nazis. But you can't just blame the Nazis, because people in France, people in Belgium, people in Poland, people all over helped out with this. Some of them were forced to. Many of them just decided it was a great idea. How do I know that? Because they killed 6 million people and millions of others. A small minority can't do that. That takes mass effort. So eventually, with a lot of sacrifice, it took a long time, in my opinion, but with a lot of sacrifices, the Americans stopped the Europeans. So now here we are, 1948, a couple years after World War II. Finally, the Americans won, thank God. And now we're in 1948. You have these formerly European Jews have relocated to Israel, reconnected with people who are still living in Israel, and they get to make a country. Now, by then, empires with royal families were kind of a cliche, and honestly, ancient Jews weren't really sold on the idea of kings in the first place, although we had them. So these reclaiming Jews decided to make Israel a socialist, democratic country. I'm not trying to be cute here by comparing them to Bernie Sanders or something, but it is kind of similar, slightly different contexts, but it's a democratic country with a socialist origin back then. So remember all those good ideas Europeans adapted from the Torah pretty late in the game? Well, those came in handy. And now Israel has changed since then, but it's still a democracy, certainly with a large public sector. So at this time period, the world wars were over, right? World War I, 1919, World War II, 1945. The wars ended, and so did all the empires. The Ottoman Empire, the German Empire, the British Empire, the Japanese, the French, and so on. Those empires ended, and lots of countries were created or became independent, like decolonial, they say now. We got India, we got Bangladesh, later came Pakistan. Every single Arab country was created as we know it now in this era, and lots of African and Asian countries. It was a global movement. So during this time period, now we're in like the 1940s, 1950s, and all these countries are being created. The downside is that there were ethnic populations in the wrong place, maybe you could say, and they wanted to go to another place, or they were forced out, and there was massive millions and millions and millions, maybe billions of people swapped places with each other as these new countries came in. And that was not a peaceful and orderly process. It was brutal. It was painful. It was happening everywhere. And it wasn't happening in North America, obviously, but it was happening all over the rest of the globe. And it was a very horrific process, but it also created many good things too. But it was definitely not a wonderful, easy process. So like, for example, in India and Pakistan, the Muslims went north, the Hindus went south. They killed each other along the way. Middle Eastern Jews that had been in places like Libya and Iraq for thousands and thousands of years, well before the idea of Islam, they went to Israel, and many local Arab Muslims that had been living in that area before it was called Israel moved out. And that was not the most peaceful of processes for either of the people. I'll say it again later, but it was almost an equal swap of populations. Middle Eastern Jews, like Jews living in Yemen, in Iraq, and Libya, these people had been there a really long time. They left all of that, all of their networks, all of their property, all of their resources, all of their careers. They left all that. They were mostly pushed out, and they went to Israel. And then, of course, there were Arabs in what became Israel, and they were also, some of them left voluntarily, many were pushed out violently. It's a swap of populations. So I'm just taking a quick pause to talk about the names, because I'm talking about what was before Israel. You've obviously heard of Palestine, Israel, Palestine. I even had to look up stuff to refresh my memory and to think about it clearly. So what is in a name over here? Is this Israel or Palestine, or what's happening? So just to go back to the historical history books for a second, the area, as far as I know, as far as like recorded history, it was called Canaan, right? With lots and lots of little tribes living there, but it was called Canaan. And then, like I said, it became Israel. I think around 1500 BC. It's not really recorded, but there are artifacts that have been discovered from neighboring countries like Egypt referring to Israel. So yeah, so it became Israel, it became Jewish at some point in around 1500, not exactly prehistory, but around then. And then all the Assyrians, Babylonians, and so forth, and the Romans finally defeated the local Jews. It took a couple of wars, but the Romans completely won, and they renamed the area Syria Palestina. You could just call it Syria Palestine. So this is now, when is this? This is 70 AD. They fully declared victory in 135 AD with the defeat of the last gasp of Jewish revolt, Bar Kokhba revolt. But really, just think about it, it's like kind of like the time of Jesus. This is like the birth of Christianity. There's a lot of important stuff going on around this time. And just for a moment, why did the Romans call it Syria Palestine? Why not call it like Rome Southeast or something else? So the Romans had fought all these wars against the Jews because the Romans were an empire. They wanted to expand and expand and expand. And they wanted to deny Jewish claims to the land. Obviously, Israel is a Hebrew term. We'll talk about what it means in a second. But the Romans won. And the Jews were a real thorn in their side because the Jews didn't like their belief system, obviously. And the Jews, nobody fights as hard as when your back is to a corner in your homeland. And it was a long and brutal process. But the Romans were not to be trifled with. And they picked two names. They picked Syria because they had, which is still like the region that is now the country of Syria. The Romans had been there for a really long time. The Greeks had been there before the Romans. So they had that territory of Syria. And then Palestine is named after the Philistines, which were an ancient Greek people who had lived in kind of around Gaza now and north of Gaza. So they were a coastal. It probably was super beautiful, really amazing beaches, great fishing. It probably was a nice thing. And the Philistines lived there until around 600 BC. And then they disappeared from history. So they were, groups come and go, right? Assyrians, and although they're Assyrians, Babylonians, different groups come and go, ancient Greeks, ancient Egyptians, and there were these Philistines. Now, Philistine, what's happening? Palestine is the Latin way of saying Philistine, which is a Hebrew term. We've been there a really long time. So the Romans took our naming, but then they Latinized it. What the Philistines called themselves, I don't know. And it's interesting to think about because the Jews called them what they wanted to call them. And then, of course, you think of the word Philistine as kind of like an insult, right? So the Jews created their own language because they were the victors at the time. But in any event, Rome called it Syria Palestine, and it's just kind of a nasty bit of Roman propaganda. And that's what happens when you win the wars. You get to name things what you want to name them. You get to use your own language. To the victor go the spoils. This is the history of the world, right? Okay. So what about, Syria, Palestine, whatever, that's a really long time ago. And then what about the Israel name? And then what about the Palestinians of today? They obviously are not Romans. So when Jews, after a 100-year process, officially reclaimed the territory in 1948 with the Agreement of America and the UN, we chose the name Israel because it was the original indigenous homeland name. Israel is a Hebrew word. It has a couple of different meanings. One of them is struggling with God. Ain't that the truth? And it refers directly to our biblical forefather, Jacob. Israel was the name he got after wrestling the angel. So it's hearkening back to a forefather. It's kind of like how America is called America after a guy named Amerigo. It's probably not the way to pronounce it, Amerigo, who came over here from Europe and realized this hemisphere was not India. Christopher Columbus thought it was India or Asia, and no. So you kind of name a country after your forefather. You get it. Now, what about Palestine? In 1964, the local Arabs to that region organized as the PLO. They called themselves Palestinians, the Palestinian Liberation Organization. And, it's kind of makes sense why they would want to do that in the 1960s. Now, other Arabs in the area had been coming up with that term. They didn't just think about it one day in 1964. Nobody had talked about it. Since the early 1900s, Arabs had been using that term, but then it got really concretized and official in 1964. Because why should Syrians and Egyptians and Jordanians get to have all the fun? Local Arabs wanted a name too. This makes sense. People do that. So, but the tricky part from my perspective is that the meaning behind the name, Philistine or Palestine or Palestinian, it has nothing to do with Arabs. It predates Arab peoples. It's talking about ancient Greek kind of sea peoples who got on boats amazingly and went over to the Gaza area. And it way predates Islam. Those people disappeared at 600 BC. The rise of Islam, the conquering of the Middle East from Islam is around 700s AD. That's quite a big time, 1,300 years later. So it's up to you. It doesn't really make sense. It doesn't really matter what I think, what my judgments are, but that's the history of it. And it has nothing to do with Arabs or Islam. But what they're saying is, we don't want Israel. That's not a term they like. They want to go back to the old times, just with no Romans. Now, those old times were not super old times from a Jewish perspective. We have even older times, but okay, that's too confusing. Let's just say Palestinian. Excuse me. So when all this was all happening, as I said before, the European Jews started the process. They primed the pump, but as Israel formed, there were lots and lots and lots of Jews in the Middle East, right? Obviously, because we're from Israel, many of us didn't go very far and stayed there. And at the time, the Muslims did not decide to kill every single Jew in death factories like the Europeans did. So we were still there. We didn't live great lives, sort of like second-class citizens, but we were there. We were living. They went to Israel. Many of them were forced out. I'm sure many of them wanted to go to Israel. And then Arabs, like I said, who were in the land of Israel, many left. Some left voluntarily. I'm sure more were forced out. I don't really know the numbers, but it's never a clean and simple and pleasant process. And there you have it, right? Now you have in Israel, and then you have these surrounding Arab states. And by the 1960s, the World War drama is kind of over. And you have these nation states that are, there's been different leadership and problems and lots of challenges all over the world as the world kind of decolonized, and it's still struggling. But there is a sense of stability to this. Syria is Syria, Jordan is Jordan. But problematically is that the many Arab nations, and eventually Iran, and to this day, to this very hour, many of them have waged nonstop wars against Israel. And I would say, for no reason. Israel doesn't want to expand. You can talk as much as you want as the West Bank, but beyond the West Bank, even if that were to become Israel, hypothetically, they don't want to go beyond that. It's a very small area, and it's not like they're going to take over everything. It's not, Jews don't even want to spread our belief system. We think it's a great belief system. We're happy that other people have monotheism too in their own fashion, but we're not like a conversion-oriented culture. That's not our mission in the world. Our mission is to study, have children, and obey the laws and be good people. That's our focus, and pray. There's lots and lots of prayer. But in any event, for whatever unfortunate reasons, Arab nations, and then Iran, which is Muslim, of course, wage all these wars against Israel. Israel emerged as a local power, and now, as of the last war, that is still kind of going on, but there is a ceasefire in October of 2025. Now we are a regional military, kind of like a superpower, right? We took out all of Iran's air defenses. That's kind of devastating. Israel did that. America didn't do that. America came in afterwards and did a heck of a job. But Israel is there is no other country in the Middle East at all with the type of military capabilities of Israel. The Arab countries, most Arab countries are poor and illiberal. And there's a handful of rich and illiberal exceptions in the Gulf. And despite Israel's vast military superiority, which they were either going to become militarily superior or dead, so that's how that happened, it's still non-expansionist. There is no plan to take over all of Jordan, Syria, Egypt, and Iraq and Iran and make it all like mega Israel. That's just not the thinking. And it's okay. So why all the wars? Why are the Arabs, the Muslim Arab countries, why are they fighting? And I say Arabs, and it sounds kind of generic, right? You're like, well, Zachary, that's not very politically correct. I mean, these are different people. Well, it was like 7 different Arab countries attacked Israel in 1948, right? And then the numbers kind of went down from there. But it was a lot of countries. It's like Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Jordan, Egypt, Syria, Lebanon. I mean, it's like every surrounding country and even further flung countries. And then think about the financing of all of it. Like, where's that money coming from, right? So why all the wars, and why do they keep continuing? I mean, they're smaller wars, but then they get really big. It's like the same old story from 1948 onwards of these mega wars against Israel, and Israel fights back. It turns out the Muslim nations haven't been very keen on diversity, equity, and inclusion in the Middle East. That is, until they lose enough wars against the Jews that they just stop fighting, right? So some of the countries have just stopped fighting. Some of those people probably fund bad actors, but like Egypt isn't fighting anymore. Jordan isn't fighting anymore. That's 2 that have a peace treaty. That's about it. And then there's the Abraham Accords, which are not peace treaties exactly, but they're business ties. So, there are a handful of Arab countries have decided that eradicating Israel is maybe not their number one priority. But that's how that happened. Now, the irony of this whole thing is that many people in the West who celebrate diversity and advocate for equal treatment, right? These really great values, they decided they're also not keen on Israel existing. It's a really crazy situation, right? When you have these illiberal not very positive countries in the Middle East. I'm sorry, I've been to some Arab countries. People live in abject poverty. They have no freedom. They have no free speech. They certainly can't vote. I wish that would change. All people deserve freedom. It should be the default setting. Most people want the same things: take care of their families, have nice, safe homes, you know, love each other. But unfortunately, their prioritizing of killing Israelis it takes precedence for whatever reason. And there's just kind of the bizarre twist of fate that the very, very liberal, the progressives, people who say that they embrace all these values of diversity and advocacy and equality and so forth. But no, Israel, for some reason, can't exist. It must be destroyed. It's a very strange situation. It makes me wonder if those godless values from the American and French revolutions maybe need an update. Well, those people are dead. I can't ask them what they think would have happened about what's happening right now. So I can only talk to liberals today about what I think is happening. And that, my friends, is where the Thacher Report begins. So I thank you so much for listening. Please share with others. Join the WhatsApp. I've created a WhatsApp. Join the Substack, and stay tuned for a wrap up of my amazing experience listening to everybody's a young man to me because I'm in my 50s, but Ahmed Fouad Al-Khatib, just a really dynamic, very interesting guy from Gaza, super, super smart and very funny and very not that it's light stuff. He talks about very serious stuff, but he is a wonderful speaker. I can't wait to hear him again. And then Adam Lewis Klein. And maybe we're going to do like a head-to-head at some point. Okay, thank you so much. Take care.